when a guard would stop and talk to you, you used to stand back and you would yell so people could hear what you were saying to that guard as they walked by or within the vicinity.
But he knew what a convict was going to do before they thought of it themselves. He'd just been around that long, and he was tough.
They'd find Sprocky in about every conceivable place you could imagine, which we would, of course, dump.
They'd wait until everybody was locked up, and he would open his door and run down to cell 1 and get a bugler can full of Sprocky and take it back to his cells.
She had a kind of a hypnotic power. There were a great many wild cats around the penitentiary, and most people couldn't get near them. But she would stand in the doorway of the cell house and say, "Kitty, kitty, kitty," and those cats would go to her.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to an exciting new idea here. This is called Stool, Pigeon Saturdays. And we invite in different
employees, staff, volunteers of the Old Idaho State Penitentiary to tell their favorite stories. Today we have our site administrator, Amber Beierle. Amber, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me, guys. You weren't lying. You're really in the trenches of history right now.
We're under a foxhole, actually.
Yes.
Fake foxhole.
It's a real deal.
Mm-hmm. So, what do you want to talk to us about today?
Well, today I'm going to talk about a story that, when I heard it the first time, just immediately spoke to my heart and my heartstrings. Dan Williams came here to the Old Idaho Penitentiary in I got to get the date right because I'm looking at death date, which now I just gave the game away here.
Spoiler alert.
He was received June 27th, 1914 out of Fremont County. So that the county seat there is Skye and Anthony, give people a concept of that, eastern Idaho. It was burglary in the second degree, and he was of the tender age of 17. Another interesting fact, just given the location of where he was, in Fremont County, is that he is actually a black man as well, which, of course, not a huge population of African-American people, especially during that time. He was born in Jackson, Mississippi. We know, I'll get into the story a little bit, so I'm going to do an overview, and then we're going to get into some of the details that just even more bring this to light and life. So Dan served less than a little over a year at the penitentiary here. After his release, he actually was doing very well. He ended up staying in Boise. He worked at a barber shop as a porter there, so kind of the doorman, kind of doing all these things. But the warden had nothing but glowing things to say about him. Suddenly, however, on March 28th, 1916, we know he comes to the prison hospital. So again, he's been released. Yeah. Like he's no longer an inmate, no obligation to go to the prison hospital. So we don't know why he doesn't go to a hospital in Boise.
You said he was completely released or just pardoned or paroled? Or
he's paroled at this point,
okay.
But so obviously he's having to check in. That's why the warden knows that he's doing well.
Right.
But again, he wouldn't have had any obligation to come to the prison. So again, that's March 28th, 1916. And actually a week later, April 4th, he passes away. The official cause of death is tubercular meningitis.
Yikes.
And yes, I practiced that several times saying that. And so they go through the record because, of course, they leave, the next of kin, all that stuff. And he had listed an Andrew Gus Davis as an uncle in Mississippi. And so the warden, John Snook, he does his due diligence. He notifies as best he can through telegram, and he gets a note back. And it says, I don't know a Dan Williams, go ahead and bury there. So, of course, giving them the right to first refusal on remains and or direction on things. And so they say, okay. They bury him in the prison cemetery on April 8th, so just 4 days after he passed away. A month later, we see in the file that there's correspondence from the uncle that says, basically, wait a second, I realize now that my nephew, who I knew as Andrew Scott, yet I called him Jack. So we know him as Jack now, that he got into some trouble in Indiana, and after that had changed his name and been signing things Dan Williams because he kind of wanted a new start, didn't want that name attached or anything. So he said, I think actually this might be my nephew. Is there any way you can send me a photo or something to confirm that it is him? And so the warden actually does that. He says, of course, we'll send this to you. We have buried him. And so the uncle also asks, like, what were his final days like? It's just sort of this, like, did he ask about home? I mean, it's just this stuff that really wrenches at your heart of, like, that he very much loved his nephew and had missed him and had taken care of him. His parents, Dan Williams or Andrew Scott or Jack, his parents had died at a young age, and that's why his uncle had taken him in. So they do confirm. He says, yes, that's my nephew. And the warden said, well, actually, we just found out that there's an insurance policy that Andrew took out right before he passed away. And you're owed almost $395. And of course, the uncle said, really all we want is a proper burial for him. So he is the only known inmate that was buried in the prison cemetery, was disinterred, and his body was actually moved to the proper cemetery at Morris Hill Cemetery here in Boise. And that is where he is buried as Andrew Scott. Yeah. And so I think, honestly, this story speaks, it's kind of an interesting story just at face value, but really there's issues of race here. There's issues of communication in his time, understanding what brought people to Idaho. He obviously had worked for railroads, and that's likely what brought him here, what brought a lot of people of color to this region during that time. And then beyond all of this, just because this spoke to my heart so much, I did a little bit more digging, found some relatives in Mississippi. I said, I did what everybody else does. Let's be clear. We all start with Google. Yeah. Okay. And this
You're making
Andrew
us sound like stalkers, boss. I found some relatives.
Right? And it's like, how do you start that email?
So I found you.
Yeah. So I might have a relative of yours who was in course, but it was 1916. So, but no, I reached out to this woman who had a blog post. She's a genealogist in Mississippi, in particular, doing a lot of research in, I believe it's called Copiah County. And it was actually, she married into this family. So her uncle's cousin, I think is what it was. Or anyway, her husband's uncle's cousin.
Okay.
Because of course, right?
Yeah.
But at any rate, so I see this picture. I actually got to see this picture of Andrew Gus Davis as an older man, much later than 1916. But just kind of put an extra face to it. So we have Dan, or Andrew Scott's mugshot, and they look alike. They look like.
Cool.
But in my correspondence with her, I talked about, I can't lie and say that probably racism had something to do with the fact that he couldn't go to the hospital here in Boise, and just that's a stark reality, because it doesn't make sense otherwise why he wouldn't have just gone to a local hospital, knowing he's got an insurance policy, he's got these things that perhaps would be in place to take care of those sorts of things. Yeah. And she was very gracious. She, I said, we did a presentation here, and I said, can I use that photo? And she said, of course. I sent the inmate file. So what I appreciate about this story is just the connections that can be made, like that there's this direct connection now to these folks in Mississippi from Idaho. Right. And beyond that, she shared it with the local library, and now they have his file. So there's a more complete local story. Yeah. And that starts right here with just some of the research that we're doing. And, like I said, it really speaks to my heart that so many people did the right thing in a time period in which we would think they wouldn't. Right. We put so much prejudgments on the past in that way, and they really were. They were doing the right thing, and so I appreciate Warden Snook for that. And he seems like actually a really good man.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, and I also appreciate the story, because I think so much of this podcast is about bringing humanity to the walls, because it's so easy to just look at these people and say, oh, they were inmates and they did this crime. What was he in for again? Remind me.
He was in for burglary.
Okay.
So burglary.
So
in the second degree.
it's easy to look at this man, and especially back then an African-American man, and I'm sure all these people were saying, well, that's what he gets, and all these horribly racist things. But at the end of the day, he was someone who had people who loved him and cared for him, and that's, I think, what I love about that story is that, you know, I didn't know that detail about his uncle wanting to know, like, did he talk about home before he died? Like, knowing, I maybe almost started tearing up because I'm just emotional.
Well, and as we've done, which I'm sure you guys will talk about, you know, or have talked about and will talk about, all this research with the cemetery, you know, there's like the Statesman article where they did this article about the cemetery in like the 1980s. It was like the place of forgotten souls or something. These people were not forgotten necessarily. I don't want to say that some of the guys, we affectionately call them creeps. I mean, there were definitely some creeps here who did horrible, horrific things. But the overwhelming majority were people who definitely had a troubled past, but that served their time, did their time, just like Andrew, and still were connected and attached to this place in that way. So I think just the fact that it's got a little bit a brighter outlook on humanity. Yeah, I mean, I always search for those stories because, believe me, we know about the creeps. We know that they happen. And I think, you know, just in like on a personal note, like, you know, having an estranged family member, my father, and we were able to claim his remains. And again, the people that are searching us out are saying, well, nobody loved this guy, you know, or, you know, you don't have to take it if you don't want to. And it's like, there's a complicated story there, you know, and I'm human. And those are the questions that I'm asking. Is there anything else? Did he ask any questions about me? And so when you can make those personal connections, it brings the story to life on a level that, you know, just resonates more with people. And that's, I think, what your guys' goal is with this podcast. And we hope that when people come here, they make those connections.
Absolutely. Nice work.
Yeah.
Good work, boss.
What?
Yeah.
That was fun.
I love that you've really bridged the gap, you know, between his family. The fact that you reached out and like found this and made this connection is amazing. And I hope that we can do that more with this podcast. The family members will reach out to us and say, I didn't know this about my, you know, or I wanted to know more about that. So
I think so often it is that there's too many assumptions that are made about the past, and you know, just making it come to life that there is Idaho history that is essential to the national story, you know, that's essential to people in the South that we, you know, wouldn't necessarily think that we had this great connection with. But, you know, one of the gals that wrote me from, who does some of the research, who was not a family member, but we were able to share the file with, and now she's got that for the county there, like I said, Copiacaia County in Mississippi. She kind of talked about, it's one thing for academics to, you know, have this, we do a great job and we're historians and we put the facts out there, but to have this personal story, to have the letters, to have this correspondence, that is so much more, brings it to life. And she actually, she's a white woman, and she said, my family were slave owners in this. And that's one interesting thing actually that I didn't talk about. One of these letters, so Andrew Gustavus did not read and write. And so somebody was writing this for him. And it happened to be, you know, again, such an American story. So his parents, Andrew Gustavus's and Andrew Scott's grandparents, were slaves. And it was actually the family that had previously owned them, but were, you know, again, a complicated time, had still helped Andrew. And they, you know, in the letter it said, you know, he might be a simple man, but he's a good man, you know. And it's just, I mean, this is complicated. 1916, I mean, we're at, you know, and I'm not trying to raise anybody up because I'm certain that there were still racism prevalent there, but that, you know, we're all trying to honor the past but be honest about the past. And I think, again, it just speaks more to that, where it's like, just even this woman saying, you know, not proud to say that my relatives were enslaving people, but I'm glad that the story is out there. You know, I'm glad I can be a part of it and bring it up. So
nice.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. That's great.
That's
Thanks,
awesome.
Amber.
Yeah, I'm happy to be the first stool pigeon for you.
There's no one we'd rather have, I don't think.
It's true.
Right, boss?
That's right.
Boss
Good answer.
being the emphasis there.
All right. Well, you guys have anything else to say?
I don't think so. Probably once I go back to the office, I'll figure out all the things that I wanted
Just
to say.
run back down and
One
just
more
yell it as
thing.
we're
Is it?
recording.
I think those are the famous last words of anything we
I
do.
think
One more
so.
thing.
One
We've
more.
got one more thing to add.
All right. Well, do your own time,
Do your own number.
and we'll see you next week. If
If you enjoyed Behind Gray Walls, please rate, review, and subscribe so others can find our podcast. If you're interested in more Old Idaho Penitentiary information and to see mugshots of the inmates featured in this episode, follow the Old Idaho Penitentiary on Instagram and Facebook. If you want to learn more about the Idaho State Historical Society and its other sites, follow ID State Historical Society on Instagram or visit history.idaho.gov. If you have a question or comment for the hosts, please email us at behindgraywalls@gmail.com.